Welcome to Postgres Meetup for All. So happy that you've joined us today. If you found us live or you found us on YouTube later, we have events every month about different Postgres topics, and it's totally virtual and a good time for all. There's three hosts for Postgres Meetup for All. We've got Ryan from PG Analyze, Arca from Notion, and I am a part of the Snowflake team. All the funding for this is from the United States Postgres Association. We do lots of advocacy work for Postgres itself. You can join us for $25 a year, and it's a great organization doing lots of events and fun stuff like this. We do abide by the PostgreSQL Code of Conduct just to make sure everyone is able to join this event and other events in a safe and professional environment. So please be courteous and professional. Today we'll be talking about contributing to Postgres and patch review. Next month we have a talk about PG cache, doing some more advanced caching stuff. So that should be fun. Join us then. If you have an idea for a talk, we would love to have you. We have a little form in our main meetup page, and you can let us know what you would like to come talk about. All the recordings for this meetup that we're doing today and all of the meetups we've had in the past are on YouTube. We typically record the main part of the session, but then we have a little bit of time for candid discussion, which we typically do not record. So yeah, welcome to today's event, Contributing to Postgres. This event I'm hosting and doing a little bit of an intro talk about. The reason that I wanted to do this event is because I do a lot of developer events and I'm out and about in the world talking to people about Postgres, and a lot of folks want to know how to get started in the code base. And I've kind of been poking around asking several folks sort of what's the best route in. And I've heard from several people that reviewing patches is kind of a great way to get started. There's obviously a lot of ways you could get started in Postgres. You could write extensions. This is just kind of one way that has popped up a couple times. And I had reached out to Paul Youngworth, and he runs like a Discord chat and kind of a mentorship program for folks who want to review patches. And Paul and I together I had wrote out a few steps about how to do this, and we thought this would be a good meetup topic. So I'm going to do a brief introduction to kind of how the Postgres code works, just to kind of set the stage for how things work. And then I'll hand it off to Paul, and he's going to kind of step through a live patch review to show folks how it's done. And then at the end, we'll kind of give some options for resources if you want to review patches yourself later. So Postgres typically does a fall release every year, and then minor point version and security bug fixes quarterly. Postgres 19 should be coming out here, sometime September, August. It's currently in a public beta, and Postgres 20 is open for commits. So Postgres 20 won't be out until 2027 in the fall, but that's where new code is going in, and that's where patches and patch reviews are happening. Postgres maintains a Git repository for code. It's at git.postgresql.org. There is a GitHub Postgres project, but that is just a mirror. That's not the actual repository. And so it can be helpful. I use the GitHub version of it. It's just as reliable, but unlike other open source projects, you won't be doing a pull request or something against that repo. Everything happens in that Git repo, and committers push code there. So the rough kind of idea of how stuff happens is, someone has an idea, they write a patch, that patch goes through some, testing on their end, and there's a set of regression tests for Postgres that Paul will show you later. You'll send a patch file into an email list that will get reviewed by the community, and then a committer will pick that up and put that into the code base for the next version. Lots and lots of discussion happens in between the patch and the commit. And there's obviously tons of things that don't make it into the code base ever. Um, there's quite a few mailing lists for Postgres. Everything that happens with actual code happens in the hackers list. If you're newer to Postgres, the novice list is good. Also, the general list, lots of things are happening there, and folks help other people in both the novice and the general list. There's several other lists as well. There's like an advocacy list and other things that you can join if you're interested in doing more Postgres stuff. The email list is a good place to start. The email lists can be kind of overwhelming. There are archives. This is really helpful, especially for hackers. I'm not on hackers, and nor do I ever want to be. But you can go look up specific threads if there are patches that you're interested in following, or just discussions you want to know about. You can search the archives and find what you want. And everything's threaded by subject line, which is pretty nice. If you're kind of curious about this hackers list, you this is where patches go. You literally attach a patch file that Git makes for you. I didn't even know what a patch file was until a couple of years ago because I'd only ever worked with pull requests. But it's a thing that Git will do for you. Hackers is not the place that you want to go and ask questions about general Postgres stuff. This is just for folks, working on contributions to the project. You can write to hackers and then get replies on patches that you have or reviews that you have without actually, I think, subscribing to the whole list. I've done that a couple times. So when new code comes in, the committers will commit it to that Git repo we talked about. There's a couple other people on the release end of the Postgres cycle. There's a release management team, and then there's a whole packaging team that makes sure that Postgres can be distributed on all the open source operating systems, like the Unix operating systems, Debian, Microsoft, stuff like that. So there's a ton of volunteer work going into obviously this entire process. And then once everything is ready, packaged, the core team will make a release announcement. All of the patches are kept in a track of in something called a commit fast app. You can just pull it up, and Paul will show you that in a second. It's literally just kind of a live spreadsheet of all of the patches that are happening in Postgres, tracking things, who authored what, who's reviewing what, and then status, like, things like, okay, this has been committed, this has been rejected, this has been withdrawn. They'll open several commit fests throughout a commit cycle. So if we're in, Postgres 20 right now, there'll be several commit fests that will open up, and you'll kind of see how that works. There's some nice features inside Commit Fast app, which will let you filter. And there's a new filter for good for first review, which I think Paul's going to show you here in a minute. So if you're wanting to do a first review, but you don't want to, get into something really complicated, their community is going through and kind of helping folks pick things that are easy to do a first review of. You'll have to build Postgres locally. There's a couple different ways to do that. I think Paul will show you the make version, or we might kind of skip quickly through that. I've done local Postgres builds recently with the LLM tools, and those are great too, and we'll build it pretty fast. This used to be a somewhat painful process, but I feel like now with LLMs helping me compile software, it's a little faster. To do patch review, you'll kind of build this local copy. You'll go in that commit fast app and find a patch to review. There are some regression tests that you can run that exist inside the Postgres code base. And then you can do your own kind of user in testing, and that can vary widely depending on what the patch is. And then reviews are literally just can be entered into the review notes in the commit fast app. I've done a few little patch reviews myself just to kind of see what things are happening in Postgres, and you don't actually have to tell anyone you reviewed it. If you're just getting started, you can review patches and learn about Postgres and never tell anybody that you did it. Um, so it's kind of a fun way to see what's happening, and if you are curious about features that are coming in the future, you can, do that. So there, Paul is kind of running, I think, in combination with Robert Haas. There's now a PostgreSQL hacking Discord channel. And inside that Discord channel is a patch review workshop. That's kind of one of the hashtags underneath there. This QR code should get you to PostgreSQL hacking. I can send some links later in the chat if folks aren't able to get that. And then the patch review workshop, Paul will talk, I think, a little bit more about it, but typically folks are kind of paired up, and you'll get, if you're newer to it, you'll be working with a mentor and maybe even working through reviews kind of together to kind of review a patch and get everything sorted out. So that is all I had as kind of an intro, and I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to hand this over to Paul to kind of step us through an actual patch review. So thank you so much for being here, Paul.
Yeah, thanks for thanks for having me, and thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to join you all. I'm Paul Jungwirth. I live in Oregon. I do freelance development, and sometimes I get to work on Postgres. And as Elizabeth said, I've been running this patch review workshop for a little over a year. I'm not really an expert in reviewing patches, but I've gotten a lot more experienced doing that and working with other people to review patches. And it's sort of forced me to do more reviews, which I've always wanted to do. So before I get to the live demo, there's a few other things I wanted to show you, like just the wiki pages that are out there, that kind of thing. So let me start with sharing my screen. Yeah, here you are. Here we are. So you should all see this. There's a wiki page about reviewing a patch. So this is good to read. But like, first of all, why even review patches? I think the reviews are one of the most needed things in the Postgres community. Everyone likes to write a patch, but programmers hate reading other people's code. In some ways, reviewing is harder than writing the patch in the first place, right? Because you might not know anything about the subsystem that the patch addresses, and so you have to go and learn and write a review. But it's not as hard as you might think. I was very intimidated to write my first reviews, and I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with it over time and realized that I don't have to know everything and be the expert to give a useful review to the community. Postgres relies heavily on this review-oriented development methodology. Everything gets reviewed multiple times. As Elizabeth showed, there's reviews, and then finally it gets committed. And I've found that committers rarely will even look at patches if no one else has reviewed them first. So many times I've seen someone give a review, and then a committer will very quickly follow up and do a more thorough review, or maybe commit the patch. I don't know. And I suspect that now with AI, we'll need reviews even more because it's even easier to SID patches, and someone has to look at them. Personally, I keep a notes file with everything in Postgres that has ever annoyed me, because maybe I could fix it. A lot of my work focuses on SQL features, but some people focus on database performance. Some of our smartest people spend a crazy amount of time improving vacuum. There's all kinds of tooling around Postgres you could work on. There's pSQL, autocomplete rules, pgdump, replication, upgrades, the extensions in contrib, other people's extensions, your own extensions. And if any of that is interesting, then reviewing stuff sort of related to that can be a great way to learn about it. The planner, just indexes, whatever, find a patch about some piece that you're interested in, and that can be a good place to start. This wiki page has a lot of good advice about what to think about when you write a review. Like asking yourself, what is this patch even for? Do we want it? Um, does it make sense for the community? Uh, and then basics too, like does it have a commit message? Does it have documentation? Does it have tests? Then if it doesn't, then those things need to uh, be added probably. And it helps just to let people know that, hey, please do these things also. And then you can also download the patch. Does it apply, or does it need rebasing because it's old and the code has moved on? Does it compile? Do the test pass? And then you could explore it in PSQL. Whatever the patch is supposed to do, you can try testing it out yourself because maybe the author didn't think of all the things that need testing. How does it combine with other features? And then you could read the code, and you don't have to do all of this, but like even pieces of these things are helpful. But you could read the code, and if you don't understand something, that's a great clue that maybe other people don't either, and you should ask a question about it. That's one of the things that I've learned to do more of in writing reviews, is not feeling like I have to figure out everything, because if it's not clear, then maybe that's a sign that there should be more comments or it should be done a little differently. And in my own patches, people asking questions has been one of the most helpful things. So to pick a patch, you could go to the CommitFest app, which is here, commitfest.postgresql.org. Here's the current CommitFest for July. And as you can see, there's tons and tons of patches here. As I said, reviewing is one of the most needed things in Postgres. Gosh, it just goes on and on, halfway to the bottom. But there's a lot of information here. There's the title from the mailing list. You can see the status, if it needs review or not. If it's ready for a committer, then there's less reason to review those. There's all kinds of tags. There's a good first review tag. There's a bug fix, which is often a simpler kind of patch to review. There's the topic that it deals with, logical replication, SQL commands, monitoring, performance. You can see if CI is passing or not. If everything is failing in CI, then it might not be worth picking it up and going through all the details, because the author obviously still has work to do. Let's see. This next column about statistics is the lines added and removed from the patch. And here, I like to look for something that is not huge, especially as like a first patch, So here, for instance, we're adding 98 and subtracting 23. That feels a lot more accessible than this one where we're adding 2,300 lines. I mean, maybe that's mostly lines of test code, but who knows? So this is just a good clue if the patch is worth looking at. And this column here is who is reviewing it already. And so if this is blank, then that especially says that it ought to be reviewed. But even if there's people on here, it can still be valuable to add more reviews. Most patches have more than one review by more than one person. So I was looking at this patch, redundant string info, get rid of redundant string info accumulation. It looks like it's really small. The tests are working. There's no reviewer on it. It's not super old. You can click in and see some more details about it. Here's the messages for the mailing list. Once I've gotten this far, another criteria that I think about is how much discussion has already happened. And so you can click and read the mailing list thread here. I like to click on whole thread and just get everything. And then you can just scroll down and read the whole conversation. And there's links to the attachments. So if there's disagreement in the community about whether the patch is worth it, then again, a detailed line-by-line review is probably not as appropriate for that phase of a patch. Then you download the patch, and we'll see if it applies and if it builds and if the tests pass. So here I've got my Postgres repository. I use the GitHub Postgres right here, and I also have my own fork of it, which is great because then I can run like CI and that kind of thing. And so I'll just every now and then I'll pull down the latest off of Postgres, and I'll make a branch, and I can use this git am command to take this patch file and turn it into a commit. So I personally have a folder where I put all these patch files and reviews and notes about the emails that I want to send. So I can run that. Okay, and it applies. So step one worked for us. Now you can see that it's here in my Git history. It doesn't have a great commit message, so I'll make a note about that maybe the commit message should be better. I can take a look at the changes. So what this patch does, he's saying that sometimes we build these log messages, even if the log level is not set low enough so that we will print them. And so it's sort of a waste of time to build the log message. So he wants to just add these checks to make sure that we're not wasting our time. So this patch is really simple, as you can see. He's using this existing function, which I didn't know about, but that seems like a useful function. And that's the end. That's the whole patch right here. We can build Postgres. Just running the make command. And then there's a lot of work to do here. As Elizabeth said, if this is difficult, then your AI tool can surely help you. There's also a bunch of wiki pages about this. There's this "Do you want to be a developer" page. There's the developer FAQ page, which has lots of environment variables and configure options that are helpful. In the documentation, there's a page about using make and the auto tools. I haven't learned Meson yet. It's been on my to-do list for a long time. So I've always just used configure and make. I thought I would show you my own configure line. I have this notes file, which is, as you can see, a huge file, which is kind of like a to-do list of everything that I'm working on with Postgres, but also just problems that I've solved, or like getting the documentation to build on a Mac, for instance, was hard. Useful environment variables. So these are my configure lines that work for me. You can find this online, but for a developer, or also for reviewing patches, I think we want to be able to run tap tests. We want asserts to be preserved and not compiled out. We want to make it easier to run it into the debugger, which is also what a lot of this stuff is for. Injection points are a way to pause the backend and are used by some tests. Depend makes it faster to compile. If you're using GCC, then if a header file changes, then the references to it will need to change, and so it does that automatically. This lets you run a code coverage report. This is where I want to install Postgres, and I run it on a goofy port so that it doesn't conflict with other things. And then these environment variables I've found are really useful also in building Postgres. If there are any warnings, then we want to fail. Postgres has a great way to print out node trees, which is like the AST that Postgres deals with internally when it parses your SQL command. And so this allows that kind of thing. We can parallelize make. And then also when we run tests, if we want to see more about the failure, then we can increase the the context that we see from the diff command. So this is probably finished by now. Yep. All right. So this compiled. Now we could install it. We can also run the tests with the make check command. And this runs what's called the regression test suite. You can see that we're testing all kinds of functionality in Postgres. This isn't all of the tests that Postgres has. This is just like the most minimal, the most essential tests. But it takes about just a minute or two. These live here in the test folder. And here in the SQL folder are all the tests that are being run right now. These are just SQL files that we get. The harness runs it through PSQL, and it compares the output to what's in this expected folder. If anything goes wrong, well, they all passed, but if anything goes wrong, then we'll have a diff file that shows up here that tells us how it differed from what the expected output was. So these tests are really easy to write and easy to check. You can add to them yourself if you want. Even just reviewing a patch, just if you think that the patch should have been tested some way that it wasn't, you could just add to the SQL file, run the tests, and see what the output is. There's also a results folder. So this is what the actual result was. And you can verify it yourself. And then, if it looks good, you can copy it into the expected folder. Or personally, I kind of like to go line by line in the text editor and copy the lines over just to force myself to think about each one. Then beyond that, there's lots of other tests. You can see that there's recovery tests. Isolation tests are about concurrency and usually transactional isolation. Here's the regress tests. This is subscription is logical replication. There's all kinds of other things. And these are the TAP tests, TAP, which is like a Perl test harness that Postgres uses. There's also all kinds of tests for the different commands. PG dump, PG upgrade. PSQL has tests. This is the code, but the T is usually where the tests live. Let's see, what else should I tell you? Oh, so this review, this patch seems good. Maybe I'm thinking about what I want to say about it. And then I didn't actually read the conversation. And also I downloaded V1 of the patch. And maybe there's a later version, so I should probably be careful and check for that. So I go through and read it. Yep, here's a V2. That's what I should have been looking at. Here's a V3. That's even better. The CommitFest app shows me what's the latest attachment, so I don't have to do all that if I'm attentive to what's in here. And then actually, a lot of people on this thread are questioning whether this is even worth it. And they're saying that building these strings doesn't really matter and you'll never be able to even notice the difference. Several people have given that feedback. So this is an example of a patch that actually probably doesn't need reviewing so much. But one that I think is more interesting if we look at is this create or replace materialized view patch. I reviewed this back in February and the authors responded, and now there's a version 8 that I want to review. So I thought it might be interesting just to look at the review, look at the patch and the review from before. This is kind of a draft of the email that we sent back in February. And what this patch does is it allows this or replace for a materialized view. And with some optimizations of not having to rebuild the whole materialized view if possible. Like if we're just adding columns, then we don't have to rebuild all of the disk files. So this is some examples of things that you might consider writing in your own review. Um, this is just a documentation wording suggestion. So there's not even any code involved, right? We're just saying like we think the documentation would be worded better this way. That's totally fine and helpful thing to put in your review, even if that's all your review has. Um, let's see, here's like an actual code thing. We noticed that the function where they were doing all the work, they added a big if else statement where like all of the old code was in the if statement and all of the new code was in the else statement. And we're just saying that seems suspicious and maybe it should be just two functions. Uh, here again is an example of asking a question, and because it's really on the author to understand this, we're saying that in these circumstances, this function wasn't called before, but now it's being called, um, even if you're using it the old way, if you're not using the new feature. So again, that seems suspicious. Uh, Here we're just saying that there should be comments. Here we're pointing out a helper function that exists that the author overlooked or doesn't know about. Personally, I really appreciate reviewers who point out mistakes like this in my patches. Postgres is so huge and it's impossible to know everything. And it's been around for a long time. So there's all these helper functions. It's easy to overlook them or miss them. Again, we have just some questions, some code style feedback. We're saying that the comment on the function needs to change since the contract changed, and some questions about if it's factored correctly. This is kind of verbose, and we're saying that we could write it in just with just one error message, and also to consider translators. This is something that comes up a lot in Postgres error messages. Is we were trying to reduce the number of string snippets that translators need to translate. And so you'll see that there's kind of some standard error messaging, and then we inject words into it. This is just some feedback about how he broke down the patch into separate files. A very common piece of patch feedback is what phase of the query pipeline things should happen in. Postgres first has to parse your SQL statement and analyze it and like look up the columns and look up the tables, make sure they actually exist. It applies rewrite rules like views. It does the planner and the optimizer, and then finally it executes things. And things have to be done in the right phase. There's lots of feedback on the mailing list or blog posts you can read about addressing this. But if you don't do things in the right phase, things will break, like showing a function definition or showing a view definition. If we analyze it too early, then the things that you added to the node tree will appear in those printouts, and that's not really what you want. It can break like PG dump and PG restore. Here's a question about a locking issue. Again, I think this is sort of deeper feedback, but I think it's really useful feedback to ask these higher level kind of architecture questions, or about how the patch interacts with other systems. And again, as an author, I think that's really great feedback to get, that you might not have thought about these other parts of Postgres. And you can review what's there, but you're also sort of reviewing what's not there, you could say. Or about partitions. Let's see. And then we did some of our own testing, and suggested thinking about some new ideas that we didn't see in the tests from the patch. So I think that's all I wanted to share about that patch. Let me see here and stop sharing here. Another thing I thought people would be curious about is the use of AI in patch review and just in Postgres development in general. I've already mentioned uh, that we might need more reviews because of AI and people sending in patches. Uh, and the community is trying to figure that out right now. I think it came up at the developers conference last May about how should people deal with AI, and I think that AI can be useful with reviewing patches also, right? As personally as a developer, I plan to have Claude review my patches before I even send them in because then I'm just sitting in better quality patches. Um, but people made some good points that I liked at that conference in May uh, that I think are good principles in general. Like, you shouldn't be asking people to spend more time on something than you did. So I would uh, discourage you from just mailing in a review that you haven't even really read or understood yourself. And if you're sending something to the community, then there's sort of an implicit promise that you've understood it yourself, right? That you know what it means. um, uh, One good way to do that is to just put it into your own words. Make sure that you can express it in your own words and you're not just copy and pasting. No one wants to feel like they're talking to a computer anyway, I think. Um, but Yeah, that's my thoughts on patch review. I hope that it was useful to you. And the the patch review workshop, I would be happy for any of you to participate in that. I try to align it with the commit fests, which usually happen every other month, except there's a break when the developer conference is happening, and it's kind of like pair programming for reviews. I think that makes it less intimidating. um, every commit fest, I'll send out an invitation to a Google form and people sign up. And I try to put people into groups of 2 or 3. If you have already arranged to work with someone, then you can let me know. Otherwise, I try to match people up based on time zone, but also based on like more experienced with less experienced. And then people just sort of do their own thing. You pick a patch, you write a review, you let me know about it. Uh, And then after the commit fest is over, we have 1 or 2 meetings where people do a little mini presentation on the patch and what it's for, what it does, and uh, what their review uh, contained. And usually there's a committer or a major contributor on the call who gives feedback on the review, the patch also, but it's supposed to be a way for people to learn how to do reviews. Uh, so don't be intimidated. It's intended to be a learning exercise for people who are new to writing reviews. And as I said, it's given me a lot of good practice that has been helpful. Right now, we're in the middle of the July Commit Fest, so it's kind of already underway. The next one is in September. If you're interested in participating, I send out an email to the PGSQL general mailing list. I also made a Google form just the other day where you can put in your name and email, and I'll send you a personal invitation the next time we do one if you're interested. And I can give Elizabeth a link to that to send it out at the end of the meeting. But you don't have to wait for a commit fest to write a review, or you don't have to write a review as part of this workshop. You can just write reviews whenever you want and send it in, and the community will certainly welcome that, I think.